Welcome back. Vinny's in a good mood. He's eaten, so he's feeling great. Now, Warren, for my little opening teaser then, I asked about people of my age, of my ilk.
Pretty old.
Hey, what...
Technically retired.
Technically dead.
Statistically retired. Oh, come on, that's a bit rough. Maybe in 1830.
Now, what should we, in my age bracket, start looking at for that retirement period? Is there a simple manner?
Well, look, the oldest sort of advice in the book is that, as you get older, past retirement, you want to have less risk because the short term becomes more important. So that means you don't want to be subject to a 30% drop in the value of your portfolio, which if you need that money in the next 3 or 4 years, you're wearing that because you're being forced to sell to get the money. Whereas if you're 30 years old, you can just leave it and it'll come back.
Yeah.
So you de-risk, which means less money in equities, shares, and more money in the bank, interest rates.
Yep.
And of course, the great thing, not many people talk about the great thing about interest rates normalising or going back up again in recent years, is that you can now get a decent return that at least sort of almost covers inflation from a deposit at a bank, and of course we've got government guarantees. So the key theme now is, as you're passing through retirement and as you're going through your 70s and 80s, you want to have less and less risk. Okay, now whether that means you have more and more of your portfolio in low risk deposits and smaller amounts in higher risk things, but you've got to protect that money you're going to need in the next 5 years, next 10 years. And you're getting at least enough return with deposits of around 4 and 5% to cover inflation, which has been 3 or 4 lately. Hopefully won't go much higher. So that's the general idea.
Okay, one quick question before Vinny jumps in. Should I, at my age, if I have property, if I have stocks, if I have stuff, should I start divesting that to my family members, or do I hold that until I go?
Well, that's really for an inheritance expert, and so I don't. Is there a reason to do it early or wait upon inheritance is going to be whether or not the tax treatment shifts.
Correct.
That's the main thing.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing in Australia is, this idea of intergenerational wealth inequality, i.e. the older have all the assets and are wealthy and the younger don't. I mean, it's a little bit overdone, but fixing that up was essentially a story about death, i.e. inheritance. Then we've had the bank of mum and dad in Australia now for the last 15 years. Well, we probably always had it, but it's got big. But actually the system is adjusting as well. That's why we're seeing wages go up and younger people are getting paid relatively more. Now, so far the asset base, i.e. the property value and the share value, hasn't fallen much. But we've got a bumpy few years ahead. I mean, I think if you are in your 80s and you've got a fair bit of your wealth in equities and property, I would be looking at how to get out of that, whether it's to pass it on now or later. You obviously want to pass it on early. You might be able to transfer ownership, but not in shares.
Yeah.
But it is all about de-risking.
Yeah.
Because the way this country is going and the way we've underestimated inflation, the way the government just keeps spending, we've left ourselves open to a major economic disruption. Call it a recession, financial crisis.
Yep.
You don't want to be caught, it's the oldest story. You don't want to be forced to sell when you don't want to sell. So one of the bits of advice I'm giving to investors, to business owners, you've got big decisions that may need to be made in the next few years, and you can do that transaction or make that decision now and you be happy with it, do it. Do not waste time. The world's getting riskier.
Good. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Can we just talk about Albonomics? Now, there's a famous photo of a young Albanese on the microphone at Sydney Uni protesting your old man's idea of changing a course, economics course. Here we are in 2026, and Albo's the Prime Minister. He's not some young student at university. And we are $1 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
1 trillion. Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, the trillions build up over. We actually just had sort of the anniversary of Costello paying off the debt. Which, a lot of that was selling assets, but still, it was the first commodity boom, which gave them a lot of money that they didn't expect, so they got rid of the debt. You know, we had the GFC, and you know, the governments of Australia were slow in repairing the budget, then the pandemic, and now this mob have got in and just thrown the rules out. So the spending is insane. Federal government transfers, welfare payments, the dole, pension, that's not what's growing. If anything, that's actually gone down. It's this funding of the care economy. And I don't think it's going to work. It's ruining the economy in a sense of productivity and so forth. But look, this is the issue, is we've got probably the most ambitious socialist project occurring in Australia, definitely since Whitlam. And I'd argue a lot of what Whitlam was doing, he was doing what Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, bringing in some pretty basic welfare measures, and they were direct payments. But this is a whole new level. This is nationalising industries like childcare, parts of aged care, to make it almost impossible for private capital. So look, Albo and economics, I've always been sceptical, if not critical, and you know, combined with the Reserve Bank that hasn't done its job, we're in a pickle. And you know, the government spending is a huge part
I don't
of
think anyone's going against welfare. Welfare is an important part of keeping a civilised society. Okay. What people are critical of, and especially me, because I can't see how you can introduce a program and not have a preventative measure to ensure that that program does what it's supposed to do. I'm talking about the NDIS. The NDIS started with a $13 billion budget, and it was working until organised crime came into it. Now it's blown out to $50 billion. 50 billion. What the government is doing now is they're saying, oh, we're going to draw it back, we're going to bring it down. And all that he's doing is victimising it's punishing the victims of that NDIS. It's not looking at the cause. The cause is organised crime. The cause is people fraudulently obtaining money from the federal government. Yet there's no money put aside to investigate and prosecute those people. Why?
Yeah, because it would land, I think, some politicians in hot water in state and federal level. I actually think we need a Royal Commission into the NDIS and all associated care economy programs, because putting aside the issue of corruption, which you know could well be the case, the fact is, and this is what's different to what happened, say, in the early 70s, is this isn't government payments to an individual because they've got an unfortunate circumstance, they've lost their job or what have you. This is funding into the private sector. It's open to corruption, as you just said, but we've executed it poorly. I mean, you know, you've got a whole bunch of upper middle class Australians who had disabled children who they could privately cover, but now there's a mechanism through their GP that they can go and get us to pay for it. Now, is that the right thing? I mean, if they could pay for it, shouldn't they still be paying for it? So look, I think we've got to, basically the only way I can see us going back to square one on this and investigating is a Royal Commission with those powers. But we're going to have a lot of state and federal politicians who aren't going to be interested in that, just like we saw no desire to have a Royal Commission into the pandemic because of revealing of politicians' decisions.
Well, I mean, the Royal Commission that this government's called, I mean, that last one with the Bondi massacre, for example, you know, the reluctance on the part of the Prime Minister to call one, and then when he does call one, it's limited. Terms of reference are so tight in that Royal Commission. Is the truth ever going to come out of it? No, I don't think so. But hey, that's me. That's my opinion.
And this all stems from a bigger problem, and that is the rise of the political class. And you know, we now have professional politicians dominating politics. Representative democracy thrived in a world going back 50, 100 years ago when people of great character and success in their lives decided to go and be representatives of the people, and had learnt judgment and experience and were financially independent from their successes in life, and then would go into Parliament. Now that's obviously a generalisation, but you know, why do we make a rule? You got to do something pretty good for 20 years in the private sector or in the public sector, but as a public servant as opposed to a professional staffer or something, before you can go into Parliament. That's where it's all come from, in my view. And you know, we've got a big problem now where we don't even have an independent bureaucracy, academia, think tanks who sit there and independently work out what are the problems we face as a community. In a lot of ways, it's that political staffer class that identifies the problems that are to be solved. They're only going to identify problems they can solve.
Yep.
We're on an unsustainable trajectory. I think the Western world has got a number of issues from a cultural and various other respects, but here in Australia, the flashpoint is the economy. We've got inflation rising before the Iranian conflict. That's only going to supercharge it, and there's going to be some trouble ahead.
That $1 trillion that Vinny mentioned that we owe. What figures does that get to over that trillion before countries say we're not loaning you guys anymore?
Yeah, so look, the government does borrow overseas, and there's a lot of fiction around this. I mean, essentially the amount of debt that's sitting in a society, in a government. I mean, in Australia we have very low government debt compared to many countries, but that's been a specific approach we've taken since we reformed this economy in the 80s. It's what I call the economy Bob Hawke. And that economy that we've built in the last 40 years, one of the best economies the world's ever seen, I'll say, before the pandemic, had a very disciplined government sector. They'd go into deficit if they needed to, but they'd try and get the books squared. But we built the biggest household sector debt the world's got. At the other end of the spectrum is Japan. Massive government debt, very low household debt. The point is, you go start changing things up, you're going to affect other things. So that household debt will be impacted. Another point, more importantly, is if your banking system's fine, which is credit creation, and that's debt, but if effectively what's sustainable in debt is just how many people are saving versus how many people want to borrow and invest, whether it's for a house or for a business. So what happens is suddenly people don't want to save anymore, i.e. they're baby boomers and they're getting older and they need their savings, then you've got less money being lent, they want it back, then suddenly debt's a problem. So, I'm not so worried about us having government debt until it's a problem sort of thing, and we've got two issues. We've got the baby boomer generation who have been saving crazily for 30 years about to slow down that saving and start using it. And then of course we've got a very indebted household sector, and that's going to be a pressure point, and we're seeing it already. So the government debt is about, including the states, about 60% of GDP. In the Europe and America, where they're worried, it's about 100 to 120%. In Japan, 235%.
Wow.
They're the canary in the coal mine. But yeah, we more important than anything is we built an economy that had disciplined government at its core.
But we haven't got that now.
In the last 10 years, it's eroded, and the governments aren't held to account at the ballot box anymore. They used to be.
Can I ask you this question? Because I've always been fascinated by countries like Norway, where the government owns the resources, the oil,
on behalf of the people.
On behalf of the people. And so all those resources that the people own, they benefit from their sale. Why can't we do the same here in Australia?
Yeah, so Norway is a smaller country. It's running, you'd call it a monoculture. Norwegian culture is not materially different, in many respects from what it was in the past, whereas our multiculturalism is a little bit more like, say, America, in the sense that we take people in. We have actually got a history of quite modest government. Not small government, but modest. And so the private sector is very important at working out what industry. So anyway, the point is our government has no history of being able to execute on exploration and then actually drilling and mining. So we do rely on private, and we have some of the biggest and best global mining companies that come out of Australia, but we also rely on people from overseas, because in the end the way to take advantage of our resources is to export them. We can't use them all here.
No.
So we've got a system that's different to Norway, but it still doesn't mean that the Australian people should be benefiting from the resources, and we have got to make sure in future we tax or get a revenue stream from those resources to a greater extent than we have in the past. But the current arrangement for LNG in particular, which is the flashpoint recently, is that we only convinced a lot of global companies to come and invest, and these are some of the biggest investments humans have ever done in these LNG facilities, on the basis that they had these various tax arrangements. We still do benefit, maybe not to the same extent as Norway, but so this is former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry's view, is that we should have a higher tax, but of course the government's also got to take the downside then. So the Australian people, if those investments go badly, they've got to give the mining companies money. So there's two streams to that model. So look, at the moment, there's not much we can do about the past investments, but in 100 years' time, uranium, critical minerals, I mean, this is going to keep going, but we've got to make sure we tax it properly, totally. But the Norway models, they're just it's a different country to us.
Because I know Tony loves paying tax.
Well, that's good because you're in the right country. As we're about to go into a budget where you're going to get more tax.
Exactly, and that's my point. How much more taxes can we suffer?
No, we can't. So think esoterically here. You'd be a pretty poor quality person if you didn't mind paying a level of tax that covered all the things you took from government, the roads, the hospitals, the education. So there's an amount of tax you pay that covers the things you need. The stuff that the private sector will never deliver. You know, this goes back hundreds of years. Then, as a nation, we are prepared to pay a bit of extra tax for fairness, to look after the most vulnerable, to make sure when you're unemployed you get some income so you don't, have to do crazy things like break into people's houses. The point is that judgment of what that extra amount of income tax or tax you're prepared to pay for fairness, you've got to be careful about how far it goes up. And I can safely say we're at a point where we've gone beyond what most Australians think is reasonable. Pauline Hanson's primary vote in polls and in the South Australian election, in my view, is Australia's modern version of people with pitchforks in the street. And if the politicians do not listen to this, they are asking for it. We cannot get out of this. The reason the government needs more money is because of these programs that they didn't control, and then of course the inflation is causing them to cost more because they wouldn't let the Reserve Bank do what they needed to do to get inflation down. And the solution is not to tax more, because eventually if you keep taxing people, apart from the moral issue about what's right and wrong, is that people will stop. So a great saying from a property developer I heard, I'm going to make more money if I'm sitting on the beach this year. Right now, as we sit here, farmers across Australia are considering not putting in a winter crop because between the price of diesel, the uncertainty over fuel, fertiliser, and then what they're going to get for it in 6 months means that they might make more money not planting a crop. We can't have an economy where people are happy not to participate. But that's what happens when you raise the tax burden, right? So you do not want to start to see, we are in a world of labour shortage. That is, we don't have enough people to do all the jobs that we're required to do to get the goods and services that everyone needs. And the last thing you want to do is put people off working. We've done amazingly to encourage participation in this country against the US trend, other countries. But if you keep taxing people, if you take half of every extra dollar, plus you're getting taxed more over here, plus your savings gets taxed, plus there's inflation, you might not do it, or if you do it, you're just going to spend it because someone's going to take it in the future.
So the Kerry Packer philosophy of...
It's totally right.
I'm paying enough tax, I'm not avoiding tax, I'm paying enough tax to you now, and I'm not happy with what you're doing with my taxation.
Yeah, I mean, Kerry was a bit brutal on that one, but I mean, the fact is that what he was, from an economist's point of view, I can't speak for the great Kerry Packer, but what he was getting at is, what I would say in this day and age is that there is virtually no productivity coming from public sector activity, whether it's the NDIS or whether it's the core hospitals, whatever. It doesn't look like they're very productive because they're not under competition. It's not contestable. So we know that private sector businesses with a person down the road competing means they try and produce the best product. They try and cut the price wherever they can. They try and run their business as efficiently as possible. That's the whole mechanism where a market economy delivers benefits for everyone. It's not a perfect process. It's tough and can be unfair itself. And I think what Packer was saying is that giving you guys heaps of money as opposed to me doing and me investing with someone or me spending it is not necessarily the smartest thing to do.
Just a quick one, if I may, before we have a break. Thank you for all your wisdom. Malcolm Turnbull's fantasy build down on the Snowy Mountains went from an estimate of, I think it's 7 or 8 billion. Now it's at nearly $50 billion, and it's still not guaranteed that it's ever going to work. How long do we keep filling those coffers
Yeah, I mean, well, in terms of the project, you're saying, do we just cut out?
Yeah.
I think the project will work. It's a cost issue, but I think the other issue you're pointing to is what's the accountability for people who make these decisions? I mean, Turnbull's still swanning around. Should he be in jail? Should he be accountable to the Australian people?
Sure.
Is that a crime against Australian citizens to mislead people? So we're going to spend $2 billion and it ends up being 10 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Now look, cost blowouts happen, especially when you've got inflation. And there are people who do like inflation because it muddies the waters.
Yeah.
But was there actual, mismanagement and corruption involved? Look, I don't know the answer, but
well, the answer's simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's an expectation that if there's going to be a cost blowout, how reasonable is that cost blowout?
Exactly. And look, we still, I can't believe it through the COVID period, but we still have fixed price contracts in our construction industry. And that puts a huge discipline on those companies to say, we're going to do this. And, if they don't, they cop it. And, maybe there needs to be maybe we give each major party a tally. You got a variation account. Let's give them 20 billion, and as soon as you break it, you get.
So how do we make these people accountable?
Oh yeah, and look, we are because
besides the vote.
If you look at history, says in the end we get it right. After exploring all other avenues, we get it right, and we have technology coming, which I think is going to probably see near the end of my life or my daughter's life.
We're going to slip down AI, I feel.
Well, we are. We're going to. What I'm just suggesting is we won't have representative democracy. We're going to have direct democracy.
Let's hold it on that at this moment, so you can have some water, Vinny can have some more food. We'll be right back with this fascinating insight from Warren.